Good. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Audit and Finance Standing Committee meeting of June 18th, 2025. I'm Kathy Daigle-Gammon, Councillor for District 1, Waverly Fall River, Musquodoboit Valley, and your Chair for Audit and Finance. Supporting us today is Dorothy Mapunga, our Legislative Assistant, Chris Giddens, our Solicitor, and Jerry Blackwood, our Director of Financial Management. So we'll call this morning meeting to order and always start with our land acknowledgement, which is that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and the traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. We're now asked for approval of the minutes of May 21st, 2025. Councillor Hensby, seconded by Councillor St. Edmond. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Aye. Opposed, nay? Motion is carried. Thank you. Approval of the order of business and additions or deletions. Madam Clerk, do we have any additions or deletions?
No additions or deletions have been received by the Clerk's office.
Thank you so very much. So we'll now ask for approval of the order of business. Councillor Cleary, thank you. Seconder, Councillor St. Amand. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Opposed, nay. Motion is carried. Business rising out of the minutes, there is none. A declaration of conflict of interest. Seeing none. Motions of reconsideration, there are none. Motions of rescission, there are none. Consideration of deferred business, there is none. Notice of tabled matters, there is none. We move to correspondence, petitions, and delegations. Madam Clerk, do we have any petitions?
No
correspondence
or petitions have been received by the Clerk's office, Chair.
Thank you so very much. Presentations, we have none. And now we get to the public participation part of our meeting. I do not believe we had anyone sign up in advance, but we'll ask 3 times. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak? For the second time, is there anyone from the public that would wish to speak? For the third and final time, is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak? Hearing none, we'll move on now. Information items brought forward, there are none. And reports, 13.1.1, Management of Winter Operations Audit. And we invite Andrew Atherton, our Auditor General, who will provide a presentation on the Management of Winter Operations Audit and will answer any questions from the committee. Welcome, Andrew and company.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to talk about our latest report looking at HRM's management of winter operations. Now, before I get started, I'd like to introduce Leanne Burnett, one of the audit managers in our office. Leanne was responsible for this audit, so she's here to help me with any background type questions you may have at the end of my presentation. Now, I'll dive into the details and put up my slides in a minute, but I want to start by making sure I'm clear on what we were and were not auditing. Our audit was not looking at how well your snowplow driver did clearing your street or your sidewalk. We had 2 objectives for our audit. You can see them on page 22 of our report. Both of those objectives start with whether HRM effectively manages. That's the key point here. How well they manage. I don't want any confusion when you hear a negative conclusion. I'm not saying the snowplow driver is failing to plow your road, your street, your sidewalk. We did not look at that. We looked to see whether a good job is being done managing the process. Let's see if I can get my slides to start. Just bear with me. Okay, as you can see here, HRM is not effectively managing winter operations. There's not even a formal assessment made against the standards that Council sets every 5 years. In fact, there's not enough information collected for anyone to complete an assessment against your standards. As I go through the rest of our report, you'll hear a couple of repeating themes. Little to no information collected, no expectations of what to collect, and no monitoring of performance. Whether that is in contracted operations or in-house clearing, the message is the same. HRM is not adequately managing the process. I'd like to take a minute to reference the standards that Council last set in 2020. As you all know, these standards define the expectations for snow and ice clearing during and after a winter storm. They define when clearing will start and when it should be completed. If you're looking for more details, we have summarized the standards in Appendix 2 of our report. The other background note I want to mention here is that the Public Works Business Unit is responsible for both in-house and contracted snow clearing. And many business units are connected to the process, but Public Works is ultimately responsible for it. I'm going to talk about the concerns we noted across all winter operations for a couple of slides before I split off and talk contracted clearing and in-house clearing separately. I've already mentioned it, but it bears repeating. Public Works is not formally assessing the standards. To me, this should be the first thing management is answering each spring. How did we do? How many weather events were cleared on time? How many were done early? How many were late? Without answering these basic questions, I'm not clear on how routine decisions are made for future years. Questions such as, are we budgeting enough, too much, or too little? Is there a difference between in-house and contractor clearing? Are the standards reasonable? Are they too strict? Are they too lenient? All of these require an understanding of how things are going. And right now, there is almost no information available to provide answers. I'll delve a little more into the details now. The first level of oversight is intended to be supervisors assigned to monitor both in-house and contractor snow clearing. While this is a good start, there are no policies or direction requiring those supervisors to actually assess performance against your standards. The only expected reporting that we could find was a supervisor's post-event report. And we found that 51 of 60 of these were completed in our testing. That leaves 50% of the expected reports missing. But more concerning to us was the completed reports did not provide meaningful information. There was no consistent assessment of performance in either the in-house or contractor reports. Some of them had a reference to road conditions, and a few even noted streets being cleared within standards, but only at a very superficial level. We expected a clear assessment backed with some level of evidence to show that roads and sidewalks were adequately cleared in the time frames expected. To help explain why supervisors are providing such inconsistent and inadequate information in these reports, you have to go back and start with the report template. It's essentially an empty text box. It asks for event highlights and comments, but the words standards and performance are not mentioned. In order to ensure proper information is obtained, it is up to management to clearly define expectations. And we have recommended that management start to monitor performance against your standards. Looking beyond the service standards, we found no other performance measures used in winter operations. This despite a 2020 external consultant report which recommended various performance or key performance indicators to better assess performance of the winter operations program. We have recommended that management consider what other performance measures would be relevant for monitoring snow and ice clearing and start to collect the information required. A further challenge in assessing performance is that management do not track the actual cost of in-house clearing operations. Management told us that because a number of business units are involved, fleet for vehicles, staff from Parks and Rec, for instance, they cannot track the costs. I'm going to leave it with all of you to decide whether you want to know what it costs for in-house clearing and take that up with management as you go forward. One area that I will touch on in more detail later is a lack of tracking or assessment of service request calls. These are calls from the public with complaints about the quality or timing of snow clearing, or possibly about damage to property or street infrastructure. Management does not do any analysis or trend monitoring of this information to identify ongoing or repeat problems. In fact, for any non-urgent or for any urgent or non-urgent service-related calls, they simply assign responsibility for a response and close them in the system. Okay, let's move into some of the details. I'm going to start with contracted operations. Now, I was pleased to see that the underlying documents here, the actual contracts, include the kind of terms and conditions we would expect to see. They outline Contractor responsibilities include appropriate penalties for poor performance. So that was a great start. Unfortunately, reasonable contracts is pretty much where the good news ends. As we've already talked about, the expectations for monitoring contractor performance are not defined, and supervisors are only expected to complete one very high-level event-related report. Despite the lack of supporting evidence, contractor evaluations have been completed annually. We only reviewed those in our audit period, so from the winters of 22-23 and 23-24, but management told us no penalties have been charged to contractors since 2019. While completing these evaluations is a good step, I'm at a loss as to what information was used to do so. The information available during our audit was not sufficient to reach a conclusion on performance. Now, I'm not suggesting the contractors haven't done a good job. They very well may have, but I'm saying there's not enough information obtained or retained to support that position, and we have recommended management address that gap. Consistent with what I've already talked about, there's no central tracking of issues or deficiencies identified for contractors. Management explained that any issues or concerns noted by supervisors should be flagged in their post-event reports, but as we've already discussed, the level of detail in those is lacking. We did note issues were identified in 8 of the 29 post-event reports we tested, but only 3 of those 8 included notes explaining how the issues were addressed. Further, there is no reporting completed for non-weather event days, so it is unclear what work, if any, was done on these days. The other way that issues or deficiencies may come to light is from service requests or complaint calls from the public. As mentioned, these are recorded when received, but service-related requests that are marked either urgent or non-urgent are closed as soon as they are passed on to the contractor to correct. Now, the contracts, again, are clear on expectations. They include timeframes for addressing various types of complaints, but once they are passed along, no formal monitoring is done to see that they are addressed adequately or within the expected timeframes. Addressing these concerns in a timely manner is identified in the contracts as a factor in assessing contractor performance, but there is no information obtained to confirm it has happened. You can see recommendation 4 suggests initiating a process to document and track this information. Damaged property is an obvious byproduct of snow and ice clearing. Damages are going to happen and will have to be corrected. In this case, Public Works once again have appropriate terms in the contracts, stating that contractors are responsible to address damages by June 1st of each year. But consistent with other areas we looked at, there is little monitoring done of these repairs, and nothing defines what should be documented by supervisors to confirm completion. Management indicated supervisors review all damages to public infrastructure, but do not look at damages to private property. We found little information recorded to support that sufficient work was done to address any of the damage claims. We looked at 20 contractor-related damage complaints and found that 17 of them were closed as completed, with little to no information in the file showing what was done. 1 was still in process due to an error in classification, and the final 2 indicated no repairs were required. Of those, only 1 of them had enough detail to justify the decision. The other lacked any details at all. The lack of tracking of this renders another good feature in the contracts mostly irrelevant. HRM holds back 10% of each invoice, which is to be released once all repair work is satisfactorily completed. This money is being released annually without appropriate verification the work is actually done. I've already identified that none of the service requests, damages or otherwise, are tracked by management to identify trends or patterns that might help in assessing vendor performance. We have 2 recommendations in this area. First, to develop a process to track all repair work to its completion, and second, to define what is expected of staff to confirm repairs are completed satisfactorily. I have one last slide related, I think I went the wrong way. One last slide related to contracted services. As noted previously, the contracts generally are pretty solid and provide HRM with the appropriate protections. Our audit identified a number of other reports and documents required from contractors, but found that these were regularly missed. Various weather-related reports, along with things such as annual hazard assessments and evidence of WCB insurance, are required but not consistently provided. We noted that every contractor was missing at least one report during our audit period, and that all contracts include a penalty provision for misreporting. And yet, no penalties have been assessed. As I said earlier, management indicated that goes back to 2019. You can see that our recommendation for this section starts with defining what is needed to monitor performance and then ensuring contractors submit it. Okay, you get the story on contracted services. I'm going to talk now a little bit about in-house services. Generally speaking, the downtown cores on both sides of the harbor are handled by in-house teams coordinated through Public Works, but utilizing staff and expertise from various business units. Now, the story on in-house clearing is very similar to contracted clearing areas. Limited monitoring, no meaningful assessments, and informal procedures. I'll walk through what we found from the beginning. We started with gaps in the planning process each year. While there is an annual mock snow day, little to no information is documented from it. We could find only 4 of the 12 expected hazard assessments when we looked to test these, and while route maps were prepared, service standards were not identified on most of them. As part of planning, we expected a post-season meeting to debrief the prior year and identify improvements for the next season, but that was not happening. Overall, it is impossible for us to tell whether management is identifying and addressing gaps and concerns from one year to the next, and we have 2 recommendations to address it. First, do a lessons learned review of the previous year, and second, to formalize what planning processes management wants to use and ensure they occur. And we found management were diligent about monitoring weather conditions. They use multiple sources to track upcoming events, but their monitoring of the actual snow and ice clearing activities is a little less thorough. As I've said already, there's no assessment against standards, and the expectations for supervisors monitoring clearing efforts are lacking. Similar to contracted operations, we found poor documentation of weather event days and no documentation on non-event days, and have recommended Public Works define what is needed and collect the information required. The process of managing in-house service requests is pretty much identical to what happens with contractors. Urgent and non-urgent requests are closed in the system when they are passed on to a supervisor, and nothing further is documented in the file. We did find the process to address damage caused by in-house operators was reasonable, and evidence existed that in the files showing work was completed. All 10 files we tested were reasonable, although 1 was still in progress when we looked at it. We also noted that while HRM has defined timelines for repairs, and the work we saw largely met those expectations, management is not actively monitoring to ensure these are met. We have 1 recommendation in this section to develop a process to ensure requests are complete in a timely manner. Ensuring that all people driving HRM's snow and ice clearing equipment have appropriate licenses and training seems an obviously important concept to me. Their own safety, that of the citizens of HRM, and the protection of both public and private property are all improved by ensuring staff are properly trained and licensed. We found that Public Works are ensuring staff are properly licensed based on the testing we completed, but training is another story. The required training was not documented, and there was no active monitoring to ensure it was happening. Now, we were able to test based on what we were told the training requirements were, and found that 7 of the 40 staff tested did not have all the required courses for the equipment that they were operating. We've recommended management first document their training expectations and then ensure that all staff have the necessary courses. Okay, this last slide, well, almost last slide, is kind of a catch-all. We had some challenges with accessing all of the information we wanted to see on this audit. You've heard the message throughout my presentation and read it through our report that management are not doing a good enough job monitoring what is happening. Part of that is obtaining and maintaining the necessary data to monitor. You will note many of our recommendations are a variation of define what you need and then collect it. I've flagged a few additional instances here, and we added a catch-all recommendation about it in the report. One part of this issue that I've been hearing, the team has been telling me that they're hearing a little too often, is that staff across the municipality do not have access to emails because they no longer exist in their inbox. So HRM recently, I'm going to say about a year ago, changed to a 2-year retention policy for all emails that are in inboxes sent boxes and deleted boxes, I believe. Now, while this will in fact mean emails left in your inbox are deleted after 2 years, it also allows you to move any email into a working folder and keep it as long as you need it. Anything that is required to show how a process works or to monitor it can easily be kept by doing so. It's important that management across HRM become a little more proactive and decide what is required for proper monitoring and oversight and start to keep those emails. I understand there may be some things that my team asked for that management didn't anticipate would be necessary, and those will no longer be available. But simply allowing all emails to disappear after 2 years without any apparent effort to keep necessary documentation is not acceptable. Okay, sorry that took so long. A lot of information to convey this morning, but the good news is that management have agreed to all 13 recommendations, and I'm hopeful that they understand the issues we have identified and intend to address them. It's enough for me. I'm happy to answer any questions you may want to clarify about the details in the report, or I can slide aside and allow management to answer questions you may have for them.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We don't have a motion in this moment, so councillors will ask their questions, and we first have Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a motion to ask for an action plan because that's not part of our standard operating procedures yet. But first of all, I just want to thank Mr. Atherton for this. Incredibly thorough, incredibly, I mean, it is damning, but it's also heartwarming in the sense that maybe we can actually change some things now. Any councillor that's been here for more than a couple of winters knows that you could have anticipated every recommendation and every issue you pointed out in your audit, which, you know, we all know there's like virtually no performance measurement for contractors. Our city staff do a pretty good job, but as you mentioned, there's no reporting, little documentation, and our process is woeful. When residents call 311 to report issues, which could be, hey, there's no cut through, and under our standards, there should be one relatively quickly. The 311 operator will say, you're within the time frame, I'm not taking your call, you have to wait. That's how we treat our residents when it comes to snow clearing. If there's damage, typically they'll call me, they'll call 311, goes to risk management. They'll say, oh, well, actually, we're not responsible for that. Here's the number for the contractor, fill your boots. I end up with, and I have in my email folders, a folder for sidewalk clearing, a folder for road clearing, and a folder for snow damage. And the snow damage is categorized by season. So I have about 8 seasons of snow damage in there. And I pull everything out of my inbox because I do want to keep them for more than 2 years. And so it ends up being me and Chris in my office who end up following up with residents and following up with staff and following up with the contractors to make sure stuff gets done. That shouldn't be the job of a councillor. That should be built into our processes. So for this, I thank you very much. And I'm glad management acknowledged the issues and has said, we're going to deal with them. We'll see what happens with the action plan when that comes forward. But I do have a question, and you mentioned the money part of it. And I know that wasn't explicitly part of what you're doing. But what I'm trying to get at, and I don't know if we need a staff report on this or what your recommendation might be, and you pointed out the number of snow incidents we have, winter operations incidents. And if you go back several years, it's decreasing. We're paying more for our snow clearing contracts now than we were previously. And it seems like we're actually getting less service. Is there a recommendation you can provide to us on how we could deal with looking at whether we are paying appropriately? Because I know it wasn't part of this audit, but is there a recommendation you can provide to look at if we're paying appropriately for what we're getting?
I don't think there's any clear and simple means of answering that question. I think full public or appropriate procurement will get you the best contract values that you're going to be able to get. In terms of a discussion of contract versus in-house, there's a lot of factors that go into that. I've identified that nobody knows how much in-house costs, so that would be a very preliminary step. But then there's a lot of other decisions that go into it that you'd have to take up with management. I think that the best thing you can rely on is appropriate procurement for those contracts.
Okay, I appreciate that. With regard to when you were looking at the files and you were looking at the fines to contractors, and it seems that it takes catastrophic situations before we actually do anything about it. There was an issue in the North End with a contractor. I think you mentioned it was, 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. We ended up having to get rid of them because they literally did not show up on several snowstorms. We had to send city staff out to clear where they were supposed to be clearing. And I would hate for that to be the trigger that says, oh, I guess we should look into some contract and take some proactive steps here. What recommendations do you have in terms of the process or a trigger, or how do we, do we have to have a contract supervisor literally follow contractors around going, they met the standard in this hour, this hour? How can we make sure they're following our standards?
I think that what needs to be done there is a level of monitoring. And I'm going to leave that to management to figure out what that monitoring is. But I do want to take this opportunity to say there are perfect worlds. There are municipalities, cities out there that have wonderful technology that track where every snowplow is and whether the blade's down, whether salt's coming out of the back, what's happening. We're not there. We're not going to get there imminently. That would be a wonderful long-term target. But we have to do more monitoring in the short term. I look at it from the way my team does our work. We do audit. We don't look at everything. We pick a sample and we test it to see whether it's whatever it is being done. I view that as a potential model that management could use here, is to pick, for every storm you have a predetermined X. These are the 10 streets, 12 streets, 50 streets. I don't know what it is that they can manage, but we're going to check those and we're going to record that standards have been met or not met, whatever the case is. But the bottom line with monitoring the contractors is that we need to start to get some more information. We need to collect, and it's what I referenced, that many of my recommendations here are decide what you need and then do it. Right now, there's a lot of stuff requested in the contracts. Based on the fact it's not being used, perhaps it's not necessary, but I'm going to leave that to management to decide what do we need and then do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Councillor Hinsby.
Thank you very much. And how I manage, I guess you could say, the winter operations is the amount of emails or phone calls I get. And I can tell you that ever since the municipality took over the province, the territory from the province in my particular area, my calls have gone down dramatically. I'm very impressed with our services. I do from time to time get phone calls and emails from residents, but I find the difficult thing is it's very difficult to predict the weather in regards to how much snow we're going to get, or the most difficult part is the changing weather conditions from ice, especially when icing comes. That's probably the most difficult to respond to, and I find that that's probably the most complaints I get is the icing conditions on the roadways. And sometimes you just can't be out on every street corner with the salt or whatever the case may be. Sometimes salt is ineffective anyway, so you gotta have sand ready. But the problem though is that you can't be everywhere at once. I'm surprised that we don't have an app or an open data set on our vehicle tracking. I know the province has a plow tracker app. You can go on site and see where the snow plows are. But do we have the same type of apparatus or data tracking we can do here that's open for the community to see? I'm pretty sure our own in-house trucks may have automatic vehicle location devices on, like we do for fire trucks and stuff. So I was kind of curious if our private contractors and our in-house operations would have that technology available, that perhaps it could be shared on open data space, because that way you can see the trucks are out there, how frequently they're going by certain areas, what time frame they're going by. Hopefully there'll be a way that you can tell if the blade is up or down. That's another question, is that they might be going down the street, but are they actually plowing or not? It's another problem to try to determine. But I'm kind of curious if you had any reviews on that. And I agree with you about the email management for retention for 2 years. I really think it should be 4 years. Our emails for this council should be retained for a term in regards to having the ability to know, get familiar with the processes and stuff. Like, I'm not no technical whiz when it comes to all this email stuff. My inbox is full of emails. and I try to delete. I try to delete as much garbage as I can, but the problem is there's some stuff in there I like to keep for quite a while, but I don't have the time to do the email management of that stuff. So, but the biggest problem though is I have in regards to is that just responding to damages. I think it does take a little extra time, but I find that when they do get around, and do it eventually, but they do get it done. But like Councillor Clary, it is frustrating that the councils from time to time have to follow up with the residents to see if it's been finished or not. The residents will contact us. It's been now 3 months or 4 months since they've been by here. I agree that there should be some kind of a damage list or whatever that could be maintained. Or they go around at the end of the season and drive around and check the roads, do a physical inspection, see what kind of repairs were required. So, but I'm curious about the automatic auto vehicle location devices. Do you think that would help with the management of service delivery?
Absolutely, being able to use that technology would be a step in the right direction. I can't speak to where things stand on that right now. You'd have to ask management as to why that's not being used at this point, what's available. I don't know, again, don't know what the contractors have. I would presume that private sector probably has some advanced stuff to track their fleets, but I don't know, we didn't look at that. So you'd have to talk to management to get a little more information on that.
Thank you, Councillor Hensby. You're welcome to come back. We'll move on to Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to the team for the report. Excellent report. Very concerning that we're not monitoring these types of issues. I was a little surprised by the report because I do not receive a lot of complaints. My constituents seem generally satisfied with the quality of snow clearing. So it did seem like a bit of a surprise to me. There have been issues with damage to fences or something through snow plowing, but that seems to get remedied. So I guess overall, I want to see a motion. I will support a motion to get an action report as soon as we can on this. But I wanted to get a sense of whether you looked at 311 and the calls and interactions we have from our constituents through 311. My sense of it was that is one way that we monitor our snow clearing, and I was under the impression that managers used the calls and comments from the public through 311 as a way of monitoring whether we were meeting our standards. So did you look at all at 311?
We just, before I answer the 311 question, I just want to clarify the fact that you weren't getting calls that's great news. And our audit wasn't looking, and nothing in here says that snow clearing hasn't been done well. We're saying that management isn't looking to see whether snow clearing has been done well. So great to hear that you aren't having a lot of issues in your district. That's fantastic. Okay, so in terms of looking at 311, we absolutely looked at all of the complaints. We tried to test those as best we could to see what was being done. Where things are falling down is that there's insufficient documentation to confirm what has been done. As I said, anything that's deemed an urgent or non-urgent request gets passed on either to the contractor if it's a contracted area, or to the supervisor if it's an in-house area, and then it's closed in the system. It's done. There's nothing else added. So there's not enough information captured there for management to be doing much with it. And at this point, management isn't doing anything with it. Again, it's an area I would expect, particularly when it comes to the contractors, that we would be tracking how many calls are we getting. Is there one contractor that's getting twice as many calls as anyone else? Was there a storm where, geez, that's weird, contractor A we got 100 calls for them and we never hear anything. There's a lot of information there, and it could be down to, geez, every time on Maple Street there's an issue. I wonder if that driver needs some more training, or if we need to monitor, or what's going on. I would suggest a treasure trove of information available there that could be used and should be used. And I'm hopeful, based on our recommendations and management's acceptance and apparent interest in doing them, that we're going to see some of that start to happen.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think we need to see those patterns if they're there, and we need to document that. So thank you again for your report.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor St. Amand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Building on Councillor Morse's observation there, I mean, with 311 data, it sounds like we have some breadcrumbs, but there are gaps in the line of breadcrumbs to be able to connect those dots. There's elements of tracking that fall outside of management's purview. I mean, for those of us that receive calls from residents, unless we wind up pushing that specific inquiry back through 311, it probably wouldn't be captured in any formal way. And so that's another potential source of data leak that occurs within our system that we may have to find some other practical way to address. I know that with at least my experience, I've only been through one winter season, and I was already anticipating what was in this report. But I'm really encouraged to see the specific measures of performance that you're indicating need to be given some thought from management. Going through that extra exercise of specifically identifying performance indicators so that the measure of whether or not we are actually receiving the value that we're paying for is being reached. And the fact that we've got these measures in place that provide very specific parameters that need to be met, but we're not actually recording them, how then, when we go back to a contract negotiation, can we say whether or not the price should go up or down, as Councillor Cleary pointed out? So I hope that the result of everything that you're suggesting here will wind up actually moving the needle forward so that we can ensure that we're getting the best value for our residents. I too will support Councillor Cleary's motion to have a specific action plan on the basis of this report, since we don't have that yet codified as an automatic action when one of your reports comes forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor St. Amand. Councillor Gillis.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Andrew and team, for bringing that report through. Excellent. Just a few questions. Do we know how many subcontractors we use for winter clearing operations? And that's one question. And do we verify that the subcontractor has the proper equipment in place to properly complete the task? And then my third piece to this, I guess, in the last slide deck, the last slide that was on there, it had in the actual report a follow-up for 2 years, 24 months. Is there a reason why that's 2 years, and can we shorten that to maybe 1 year and not let this go for so long? Thank you.
I wondered if anybody would notice that. Congratulations. I'm going to start with the 24 months. We have traditionally done 18 months for our office for follow-up. I'll be honest, I'm leaning towards moving to 24 months anyway. It takes a lot of our resources to do it. The longer we wait, the more new audits I can get done. In this case, 18 months simply didn't make sense because it only covered one winter season. Right. And to give them an opportunity to get to get 2 years worth of work done to actually see that what we're asking for has happened made more sense. That said, on your end, you're going to ask for an action plan. Yeah. Follow up with it, ask more questions, call them back next year, and well, let's assume the snow's all going to end in March next year. So next year in March, ask them how it went. You know, you're in control of that, how much information you want to obtain. For us, 24 months makes sense for this one. And I expect you're going to see 24 months as my standard going forward, just to give folks a little more time to tackle big recommendations and give my office just a tiny bit of breathing space. In terms of the number of subcontractors, are you talking about folks that, so we're not talking about the original contractors, we're talking about down a level from them?
Well, no, that's a good point, actually. I never thought of that. But just basically, how many contractors, I guess the main contractors, do we use overall across HRM? Like Dexter's, Ocean, is there
So if you look at Appendix 3, okay, right at the back of the report, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 contractors sharing the 7. I hear 7 in my ear. Yes, 7 contractors.
Okay.
I know in-house also has some ad hoc hourly folks that help out. We didn't get into that level. In terms of what equipment they're using and whether they know what's there, I can't say that that's part of the contract process. I would presume that is part of the contract evaluations. Okay, so yes, they do need approval from contractors need approval from management of what equipment they're using. Presumably that's also part of your contract, your original contract procurement process is what are you bringing to the table? What's it going to cost?
Okay, thank you guys. I'd be happy to support Councillor Cleary's motion when he brings it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gillis. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, when you look at that appendix, I count only 6 contractors. Dexter's got 3, Leahy's got 2, so maybe that's where people are mixing them up. Before I bring the motion, Councillor Gillis just sparked something in me. So actually, we do have a number of contractors that do sub it out in certain areas. I know in the area I used to represent, and part of it I still do represent, Dexter subcontracts out to 2 or 3 different people. And so it'd be curious to know if you looked at, and if not, I'll ask management, when they do sub that out, if management does look at the equipment that the sub has, because sometimes it's questionable. And sometimes it's kind of last minute. I understand it. Some guy didn't call in, so they're calling some guy from Bridgewater, hey, can you come here? And then he's an hour late. And then, anyway, that's a whole other issue. But did you look at the subcontracts and for the contractors? Was that part of the audit?
We didn't look at that explicitly to test it. If they were referenced in a weather event report that this is how they're going to be doing it, we were aware of it. But we didn't go into any depth of testing on the subcontractors. We were looking to see what management was doing to check on this.
Excellent. And I thank you again, Mr. Atherton, for all this hard work in your office. So I would move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee direct the CIO to develop an action plan on the winter operations audit and report back to the Audit and Finance Standing Committee within 3 months.
Second.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Morse.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary.
Typically in the past, we've asked for 6 months, but as we've discussed in the last few months ourselves, that seems too long a time period. So I think 3 months is more than adequate, especially where management knows the issues and has agreed to work on all of them. 3 months seems reasonable, and then that lines us up actually to hopefully make some changes for this coming snow clearing season. I would hate for us to miss this one. And I do appreciate also Mr. Atherton's massaging of the time frame coming back here, because I think it'll be important to not just capture the next snow clearing season, but to see if progress is actually being made and if we can see from one to another season in terms of what the reporting and the measurement gets us in terms of better quality, et cetera. So anyway, I'll leave my comments there on the motion.
Seeing no other councillors on the list, we would call for the question on the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Opposed, nay. Motion is carried. Before we move on our agenda, I'm just making sure that no one else has any further questions. If not, thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you, Leanne. Leanne, thank you so very much. We'll move on now to motions, of which there are none. In camera, there is none. Added items, we don't have any added items. Madam Clerk? Nope. Notices of motion. Any member of the committee have a notice of motion? Seeing none, the date of our next meeting is August 20th, 2025, and we would ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor St. Amand, we are adjourned at 10:45. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful